There are legacies that shine, legacies that inspire, and then there are those that break the world's heart. When the news spread that Paul Walker, the quiet soul behind the wheel, the man whose smile softened even the hardest of scenes, had left behind a legacy far more profound than fame or fortune, America stood still. His death had already shaken millions, but what he left behind, that was something no one was prepared for. To most, he was Brian O'Connor, the blue-eyed outlaw with a conscience, the man who made speed look poetic. But behind the roar of engines and the glow of Hollywood, Paul Walker built something far gentler, a life rooted in kindness, humility, and a generosity so discreet that those closest to him only discovered its full extent after he was gone. And when his family opened the documents he had carefully prepared, they found not the wealth of a superstar, but the heart of a man who had spent his life giving more than he ever received. He had amassed a considerable fortune, a beautiful home surrounded by Californian sunsets, a car collection whispered about in the industry, and millions in film royalties. Yet none of that compared to the truth hidden beneath. His unwavering devotion to his daughter, Meadow, his secret philanthropic acts, and a private wish he had carried for years, quietly shaping his life without ever seeking recognition. His will, handwritten in some places and meticulously organized in others, held decisions that stunned even those who thought they knew him best. There were omissions that raised questions, choices that revealed hidden wounds, and acts of love so unexpected that they brought tears to the eyes of hardened lawyers. Because Paul Walker left behind more than an estate, he left behind a message, a final gesture filled with tenderness, regret, and hope. The kind of gesture only a man who understood both fame and fragility could make. And when the final page was turned, silence fell, the kind of silence that only truth can create. Long before the world knew his name, long before the engines roared and the cameras chased his every expression, Paul Walker was simply a boy growing up under the Californian sun, curious, gentle, and quietly searching for a place to belong. He was born in Glendale in 1973, the eldest of 5 children, into a family that lived modestly but held tightly to one another. His father, a former boxer turned sewer contractor, and his mother, a model with a soft voice, taught him early that life was not measured in luxury, but in effort, courage, and kindness. Paul's childhood was not marked by privilege. It was marked by movement, by change, by the unspoken pressure placed on an eldest son who felt responsible for those who followed him. He attended public schools, worked small jobs, played football, surfed whenever he could, finding in the ocean a kind of peace he struggled to find elsewhere. He was shy, but not fragile, quiet, but never distant. Those who knew him as a boy often described him with the same word, thoughtful. His introduction to acting came unexpectedly. His mother, sensing a spark of something rare, sent him to small auditions when he was still a toddler. Commercials, minor television roles, a handful of appearances that barely registered in Hollywood's memory, but each one taught him a lesson. He learned discipline, he learned patience, and above all, he learned that fame, even in its smallest form, could be both a gift and a burden. Yet his true turning point came not from a role, but from a moment of clarity. As a teenager, standing on a quiet beach with the tide washing over his feet, he realized that life was fleeting, that every choice mattered, that every breath had weight. He promised himself then something simple, almost naive, but deeply sincere. He would live with purpose, even if the world never noticed. That promise stayed with him, shaping the man he would become. It guided his humility, his generosity, and later the secret acts of charity that no publicist ever highlighted. And as he moved into adulthood, carrying both the warmth and the bruises of his upbringing, he found himself drawn not to glamour, but to meaning. It was this inner compass, forged in a childhood both ordinary and quietly profound, that prepared him for the extraordinary life that awaited him. A life that would rise faster than he ever imagined, and cost him more than he ever knew. Paul Walker's rise to fame was not the sweeping, explosive ascent that Hollywood likes to romanticize. It was quieter, steadier, like a tide that strengthens with every wave. until suddenly the whole shore realizes its power. He began with small roles, teen dramas, modest films, appearances in series that would eventually fade into nostalgia. Nothing about these early steps suggested he would one day become a global icon, but behind each performance, there was a discipline and sincerity that set him apart. Directors noticed it, crew members felt it, co-stars trusted it. His breakthrough came when he was cast in Varsity Blues, where audiences first glimpsed the charisma that would soon captivate millions. But it was the Fast and the Furious that changed everything. Not just for his career, but for the landscape of early 2000s cinema. The film was supposed to be a modest action project. Instead, it became a cultural phenomenon. And at the center of it all was Paul Walker, playing Brian O'Connor with an honesty and restraint that made the character unforgettable. He didn't play an action hero. He played a man with a moral compass, a man torn between loyalty and justice. His performance carried both toughness and tenderness, a combination rare in Hollywood, rarer still in blockbuster franchises. Suddenly, Paul was no longer an anonymous face in supporting roles. He was a leading man, a global star, an icon in the making. But fame, pour lui, était un vêtement qu'il portait avec pudeur. He never sought the spotlight outside of the work. While others embraced the red carpets and the tabloids, he slipped away to surf, to travel, to help quietly in communities devastated by natural disasters. When he amassed the beginnings of real wealth, he did not rush to luxury. He invested with care. He bought a home that felt like a sanctuary rather than a palace. He built a car collection not for show, but out of genuine passion. Every engine, every curve, every detail was something he studied and cherished. His career blossomed, sequels, international press tours, critical recognition for roles that showed his range. Yet even as the films grew larger and the checks heavier, he remained grounded. Co-stars spoke of his gentleness, the way he listened more than he spoke, the way he made everyone, not from stunt drivers to assistants, feel valued. There was no arrogance in him, no hunger for dominance. Just a man doing what he loved, grateful for every opportunity. And slowly, quietly, he built not only a career, but a legacy. Film royalties accumulated steadily. Investments matured. His charitable work, once done anonymously, began to shape an organization. Reach Out worldwide, that would soon play a pivotal role in the story of his legacy. He wasn't building an empire. He was building safety nets for his daughter, for communities in need, for a future he hoped would outlive him. Yet as the lights grew brighter, a silence formed behind them, a sense that fame was a wave he rode rather than controlled. He often spoke of wanting a simpler life, a life closer to the sea than to the studio. But Hollywood had its own demands, its own rhythm, its own cost. And Paul, malgré toute sa douceur, ne pouvait pas toujours y échapper. His rise was beautiful, unexpected, luminous, but its shadow was beginning to show. He carried it with grace, but it grew heavier each year, setting the stage for the price he would ultimately pay. He had fame, fortune, and a place in one of the most beloved film franchises of all time. Yet beneath the glow of success, Paul Walker carried a weight the world never truly saw. His was not the loud, chaotic downfall that Hollywood often witnesses. His was a quieter cost, a slow erosion of peace, privacy, and balance, paid over years with a smile that hid more than it revealed. The first price was time, the very thing he valued most. Time with his daughter, Meadow, slipped through his fingers as studio contracts tightened and filming schedules stretched across continents. He adored her, spoke of her constantly, kept photos of her in his trailer, and longed for ordinary days, school runs, breakfasts, sunsets shared without interruption. But his career demanded movement, and movement meant absence. He missed birthdays, milestones, conversations that should have been mundane, but became, in his absence, painfully precious. He carried a quiet guilt that deepened with every passing year. Then there was the cost of being seen. Paul Walker, gentle and soft-spoken, had never been built for spectacle. He hated gossip. He disliked red carpets. The blinding cameras made him uneasy. Fame for him felt like an ill-fitting coat, something he wore because he had to, not because he wanted to. Every interview, every press tour, every moment of scrutiny chipped away at his need for normality. Even a simple day at the beach became complicated. The ocean, once his refuge, grew crowded with phones and whispers. He also bore the weight of expectation. Fans adored him, but they adored an idea of him. The brave, loyal, effortlessly cool Brian O'Connor. Living up to that image was exhausting. Paul was kind, yes. Courageous, yes. But he was also sensitive, private, introspective. And the clash between who he was and who the world wanted him to be created a silent fracture inside him. A fracture that widened with every blockbuster premiere. His work with disaster relief, though deeply meaningful, added another layer of emotional strain. Traveling to devastated communities, seeing suffering firsthand, holding the hands of people who had lost everything, these experiences changed him. They humbled him, yes, but they also haunted him. He often returned home carrying stories he could not share, grief he could not unload. He funded missions from his own pocket, spent nights organizing aid, and gave more than he ever spoke about. But compassion, when lived at such intensity, has a cost, and he felt it. Then came the growing fear, unspoken but constant, of what might happen if something were to go wrong. He loved speed, not recklessness. Cars were his sanctuary, not his danger. Yet he knew that life lived between film sets, charity missions, and high-performance engines carried risks. He tried to be careful. He tried to stay centered. But the pace of his world became increasingly frantic. The balance between professional demands, personal longing, and physical fatigue grew more fragile. Still, the deepest wound he carried was the one he rarely named, the fear of failing the people he loved, his daughter, his family, his closest friends. He worried that fame would distort everything, that his absence would create shadows in her life, that his work would overshadow his presence. He vowed silently to change things, to slow down, to build a legacy not of red carpets, but of stability, protection, and purpose. He was beginning to make those changes, reorganizing his finances, refining his will, adjusting his commitments, when fate intervened. Not with a warning, not with a whisper, but with a silence so sudden and absolute that the world would feel it like a shockwave. Paul Walker had given everything he could, more than he should have. And the cost, the truest, harshest cost, was that he never had the chance to finish writing the life he was finally ready to live. When Paul Walker's will was opened, it revealed a man entirely different from the Hollywood archetype the world thought it knew. His estate was not simply a catalog of luxury or status. It was a map, a carefully drawn blueprint of love, responsibility, and the quiet values he had carried throughout his life. The first and most striking decision was clear, unwavering, absolute. Everything went to his daughter, Meadow. Not a fraction, not a percentage, everything. He entrusted her with his entire estate, properties, royalties, savings, investments, car collections, and perhaps, most importantly, the future revenue from the Fast and Furious franchise. It was a gesture of devotion so complete that even his closest friends were moved to tears. For Paul, legacy did not mean wealth. It meant protection. It meant ensuring that his daughter would never experience the instability he had felt as a child. He wanted her to have a foundation so strong that she could build any life she desired upon it. But his legacy extended far beyond financial security. He left behind Reach Out Worldwide, the humanitarian organization he founded with quiet determination. Many did not know how much of his personal income he had invested into it. The charity became his second heartbeat, his way of standing with people in their darkest hours. After his passing, donations surged, inspired not by spectacle, but by the authenticity of his mission. His friends, stung by grief but driven by love, vowed to keep the organization alive. Today, countless families worldwide stand safer, stronger, because Paul Walker once chose compassion over convenience. His legacy also lived in the messages he left behind. Journals, notes, recordings, fragments of thoughts written between filming days. Small details revealed the man he was, A father who feared disappointing his daughter, a friend who treasured loyalty above fame, a human being striving to stay humble in a world that rewards ego. But the part of his legacy that struck the deepest chord was contained in a letter addressed to Meadow, handwritten in uneven lines. If I leave you anything, let it be freedom. Freedom to live gently, to choose love over noise, to be your own compass. Those words became the emotional core of his estate, a message of guidance, tenderness, and quiet strength. Paul Walker did not chase immortality. He built it, softly, sincerely, through every life he touched. In the quiet that followed his passing, Paul Walker's world seemed to fold into a soft, aching silence. His home, once filled with the easy rhythm of his footsteps, became a sanctuary of stillness. Sunlight slipped across the walls he had carefully decorated, catching on photographs of ocean waves, treasured moments with Meadow, and candid smiles captured between takes. Each object, each corner of that house, seemed to hold a memory, fragile, luminous, undisturbed. Those who loved him found themselves tracing his presence through these shadows of everyday life. They spoke of him in murmurs, not because grief demanded it, but because the gentleness of his spirit seemed to ask for quiet. There was no grandeur in the way he had lived, no hunger for spectacle, no need for applause once the cameras stopped rolling. His greatness was quieter than that, rooted in kindness, in patience, in the unassuming way he gave more than he ever claimed. As Meadow began to navigate the weight of the legacy he left behind, she discovered not just wealth, but purpose. She carried forward his values, his compassion, his desire to help without being seen. In doing so, she did not merely honor her father's memory, she extended it. She breathed life into it. And through her, the world glimpsed the truth of who Paul Walker really was. Not an action star, not an icon of speed, but a man who believed in gentleness above all other things. The world mourned him loudly. But those who truly knew him mourned him softly, the way he would have wanted. And perhaps that is where his legacy finds its most enduring form, in the quiet moments, in the echoes of his kindness, in the lives he touched without ever asking for recognition. He left this world too soon, in a silence that felt unbearably sudden. Yet the light he carried, humble, steady, fiercely human, continues to shine long after the engines have stopped and the screens have faded to black.